Yeah, this is the problem. The pre-patch event is not really working properly. It was supposed to be tested on the PTR for the full weekend, and instead it was cancelled just after 3 hours by Blizzard because of reasons. So we didn't even get to have a proper testing for a pre-patch event which is supposed to come out in 9 days. 9 days, and there is no testing yet. The few things that were tested in the few hours in which it was up on the PTR were dreadful. The mobs were just dying far too quickly. The event was also ending far too quickly because it was too easy to get to the threshold to make the boss attackable and then defeat the boss. It only lasted 5 minutes. You also had plenty of other problems, like the fact that this event spawns in zones very far apart from each other, which makes it very difficult to just go and stay in the same zone, getting from event to event to event. Instead, you have to keep flying across the world basically to get to these events. So a whole lot of problems for this pre-patch event. A lot of players use this pre-patch event as a good way to gather and to collect freebies, free loot, for the leveling of the next expansion. That's usually what is going to be the biggest part of this pre-patch event for players. Some players sure are going to be hunting the transmogs, the pets and the toys available as well, but the biggest use for a pre-patch event is to gather your alts, gather the characters you haven't even played in years that thanks to the Winds of Wisdom buff of these last few weeks you have been able to level 60 and then bring them up to even higher item level thanks to the pre-patch event and the loot it rewards. Even if we discount the absolute shit state of the event itself, and we shouldn't, one of the biggest complaints about this event, because we can assume that the mobs will be tuned properly and the bosses will be tuned properly and it won't be as much of a problem. One of the biggest issues is that the theme of this event is primal invasions. So you have 4 different elements: earth, fire, storm and water, invading 4 different regions. The problem is in the region themselves, because the regions in question in Kalimdor are the Northern Barrens and Angoro Crater, and in the Eastern Kingdoms it's gonna be Tirisfal Glades and the Badlands. You see, the problem is that these zones are very, very far apart from each other. The problem is that if you have an event popping up in the Northern Barrens and then 5 minutes later you have an event popping up in the Badlands, and then 2 minutes as you are completing the event in the Badlands there is an event in Angoro Crater, how are you going to move and traverse the entire world effectively? Remember, in case you haven't played or you simply don't remember, that the pre-patch in BFA for Shadowlands was contained all within Icecrown. So you had all of the bosses, all of the mini bosses of the event spawning, you had like 25 of them, all spawning within Icecrown. So it literally took you 10, 15 maybe seconds to fly from one boss spawn to the next. It was very easy. Very rarely you would just miss out entirely on a boss and the rewards. In this case, it's going to be much more likely that you're going to have to decide where you want to go and which of the zones you simply won't have the time to reach at this state of the event. That's one of the things that has gotten players quite annoyed about the event itself, because even if you account for the mobs now taking a little bit longer to die, so it's going to become a little bit more feasible for you to reach the place in time, etc, etc, the 4 different zones are still very far apart from each other, which will make hanging around in this event for players very annoying. You know, the staple for a pre-patch event is you on your flying mount, AFK, alt-tabbed doing something else, and then every once in a while you check the game to see if something spawned, you fly there for 10 seconds, you tag the mob, you go back AFK, when the mob is dead, you collect your loot. That's been the history of a pre-patch event. In this case, you won't really be able to do it with how far apart these zones are. That's the main complaint, first of all, about the event itself. We also have another complaint, and this one is much more serious, because this complaint is about the loot. Yes, things of course get much more serious once loot is involved. Previous events of course gave you pretty good high up item level. Of course it made no sense, it was very high item level for no effort, but that's exactly the point of a pre-patch event. The expansion is over, you don't have to keep up the seriousness of the item level rewards depending on the activity. So for the pre-patch event, item level rewards have been often quite high. Even in BFA, for the pre-patch event of Shadowlands, the reward was at the same level of heroic raiding. So literally spend 5 minutes in Ice Crown tagging mobs and you can get heroic level loot. That's perfectly fine because the expansion is ending. For this pre-patch event, however, the few things we have been able to see in the PTR before Blizzard took down the event was that the vendor in question, the vendor giving you the loot, gives you 252 item level. Now, currently in Season 4, Mythic item level is 304, Heroic is 291, and Normal is 288. We have to go back an entire tier, we have to go back to Season 3 to find some comparison with this, because in Season 3, Mythic was 278, Heroic was 265, and Normal was 252. This reward is the equivalent of Normal Raid from the previous tier. So Normal Raid from March of this year is when 252 loot was available. Now, you might argue that Blizzard doesn't consider Season 4 as a real season, but if the next expansion is scaled, if the next expansion mobs and enemies are scaled with that item level in mind, then it certainly matters, right? I made a video, this thing right here, I made a video comparing the item level, I guess, speed and difficulty in leveling up, depending on how geared up your character is. Of course, as expected, it's a breeze with high item level. Even with 270, 260 and 250 item level, it was more than doable. I pointed out the issues with leveling is if you kept your default boosted item level, which I believe was 148 item level, or if you kept your Shadowlands leveling item level, which was in the 180 item level range, that would have been an issue, because you would have been quite weak, quite weak. So the item level reward has annoyed players a little bit, because 252 is roughly 20 to 25 item levels lower than what we used to get in comparison in BFA for Shadowlands and in Legion for BFA. So Blizzard has went down basically a couple of tiers in item level in terms of the rewards from the pre-patch. Also, a few other things from the pre-patch itself, unlike what happened in BFA, where the majority of the loot, the epic loot dropping from the pre-patch event, was from the bosses themselves. So if you were a cloth user needing a chest piece, there were only 2 bosses in Ice Crown dropping you a chest. So you had to wait for the right boss to pop up, go and defeat it, and then have a chance to loot something. And then you have a chance of the 3 to 4 items the boss could drop to loot the actual chest. So even though the loot in BFA had higher item level, it was harder to obtain it because it was much more RNG. Whether or not you actually looted it from the boss, and then whether or not you got the right item that you needed from that boss. At the very least, in a glass half full manner, the loot in this pre-patch event will be from a vendor. Again, not quite certain how the actual currency you will be gathering from the pre-patch event will work, because at the very least, from what we saw in the few hours that the pre-patch event was available, once the event becomes active and the boss of the invasion spawns, he's going to be invulnerable. There is going to be a bar that you have to fill by defeating enemies. And it is during that bar, during that empowerment of all of the mobs around the boss, that you defeat them and they drop this primeval essence currency. It's with that essence that you get to then trade it in with a vendor for your gear. And for other things like toys, pets and whatever, but primarily for gear. There does not seem to be any gear at the moment attached to the bosses of the invasions. You don't have to actually go and loot them from the bosses, you can just get the currency and then trade them in for whatever you want. That has been the TLDR of this event so far, which is quite disappointing because it is seemingly very far behind in testing. The event is out in 9 days and we still haven't gotten to test it. properly. It is still quite broken in many different things, including actual in-game issues like the water invasion having fog so thick you can't even see 10 yards in front of you, for example, and other things like that. Those can be fixed. What is going to be a little bit less fixable, of course, is the item level that Blizzard chose for the invasion event rewards, as well as the regions themselves, the zones themselves. Being so far apart from each other is going to make it quite annoying to handle. So that is what is going to come in the pre-patch of Dragonflight, hoping that is going to get fixed somehow, because currently there is not really many positive things to take from this event itself, hoping that Blizzard will find some room to test the event again before it goes live, because right now it's very disappointing and quite frustrating to navigate through at the moment. So hopefully they will get it sorted before they ship it live in just 9 or so days. But for the moment, we're stopping here. Thanks, of course, guys, as usual, to all of my Patreon supporters for supporting me and allowing me to continue to produce WoW content. You're very nice, very generous, and perhaps even naive to be spending your money. Unlike them, if you don't want to spend any money, that would also be quite understood. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Those few mouse clicks won't actually cost you money, so why not? Lastly, for social interactions and general simping, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon, which will give you access to my super secret and hidden Discord server. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, personally, I don't care. The pre-patch event doesn't need to be that great. I just want some loot for my alts to level up in Dragonflight. Really, that's all I want.